Today is, I think, hopefully you'll take away from this, as I said yesterday, we spend a lot of time talking about what we're against. This session is going to also talk about what we're for, what we do as a result of these issues, what we've learned from it. Sadly enough, in the agricultural sector, we don't work well with other commodity groups. We focus entirely on ours. We have oftentimes the I'm glad that's not me attitude. We don't share from it and learn from others. You just heard in this case an ancillary from the Fur Commission. But more importantly, as we look to in the food production side of the equation, this affects all of us, both pork, beef, dairy, poultry. We've all gone through it. And so we need to do a better job of learning from that. I have a saying that says, okay, let's not give them ammunition to shoot us with. So we need to think about both on this standpoint from crisis preparedness and then crisis response. What are you doing prior to an event occurring to demonstrate you thought about it, cared about it, had appropriate actions in place to deal with it? Because when you're exposed to the blast furnace is not the time to be thinking about what you need to be doing in this process. And so today's panel is talking firsthand with individuals who are dealing with these issues across the board, because this is not just about on-farm animal welfare issues and that. It goes across the span, as you just heard, in this case from the Fur Commission, but it also talks about issues related to the environment and the community and things of that nature, of image. And so we're going to kind of have an in-depth discussion on that. And so today we have three panelists that is going to bring up one, Jamie Jonker from the dairy side of the equation. Guys, you want to come on up and sit down, and then I'll turn it over. Bryan Humphreys from our pork associations, and then Scott Sobel from the professional side that's dealing with, from a professional agency side of dealing with this. So I'm going to, first of all, today introduce the individuals, and then I'm going to pose a few questions to them for their response, and then we're going to open it up for questions and dialogue as it relates to anything that you guys may have as it relates to specific questions of individuals who have been on the front lines in dealing with this. First of all, Jamie Jonker. Jamie, in his current role as Vice President of Sustainability and Scientific Affairs at the National Milk Producers Federation, Jamie has responsibility including animal health, welfare, animal biotechnology, dairy farm biosecurity, dairy farm air, water quality, dairy farm sustainability, and technical services. He's also involved in coordinating relations with the Federation of Animal Health and Well-Being Committee, as well as the Environmental Issues Committee. So, obviously, complete scope of business. Bryan Humphreys is a native of Iowa. Bryan grew up working on a family farm raising hogs, corn, and soybeans. Following the 2008 election, Bryan joined the National Pork Producers Council, where he served as director of our grassroots organization. In this role, he was responsible for helping pork producers across the country communicate with their members of Congress. As part of this role, he managed NPPC's efforts in the upper Northeast as we looked at protecting producers' agriculture from anti-farming. Currently, Bryan serves as the Ohio Pork Council Executive Vice President in charge of their business for the Ohio Pork. Scott Sobel works for kglobal agency here in Washington, D.C. He's worked on a variety of areas, most recently on the animal recovery mission at dairy farms in Florida. But as kglobal responsibilities, he's counseled National Pork Producers Council, Egg Board, and a number of other food manufacturers and associations on recalls, crisis, legal, PR advice. Scott and kglobal on the PR side now, but he has been an award-winning investigative reporter and producer at TV network and major market across the country. So, very diverse group of people that's here today to talk about this. And so, we thought we would start off with something that's very current. Many of you may have seen it, but from an individual firsthand, both from the perspective of some description, but learnings from it and what they do about it. Jamie, we're going to start off with you. The dairy industry recently dealt with a major activist campaign in Florida that dealt with it. Can you talk through the issue and what made it unique, and more importantly, the learnings and what you did about it?
Thanks, Dallas. And for those of you that don't know, if you don't, there's a group called ARM down in South Florida who has been involved in the area down there looking, prior to the dairy sector, looking at illegal slaughter and small-time issues. Last year, in the middle of summer, they did a coordinated effort to get activists, undercover activists, to record videos on a number of dairy farms in the Lake Okeechobee area. Lake Okeechobee is a long-time dairying area, with dairying going back to probably at least the 1920s. I think what we've seen in previous actions with undercover videos are a single site. And so what made this unique was it was 4 individual farms. They were on these farms starting probably in late July and continued on some of the farms until the beginning of November. And so the most unique part was that it was multiple farms, and they strung out the release of the videos over time, kind of building a narrative about how the industry in that area treated their animals, and stringing along the media to build a narrative of the only responsible thing would be to never choose dairy. They spent a great deal of time gathering this information, and in the beginning, when they started releasing the videos, I think they had the hook of the media. I think as time went along, the media in the area was starting to understand the tactics that this group was doing, and we're kind of getting to, I'll call it saturation. But I think a thing that's common with what happened there, while it was multiple sites, things that we often see in undercover videos, at least in the dairy sector, are 3 elements. Common practices that are done well that are demonized. Common practices that aren't done well that need to be what I call protocol drift. They're doing a practice that's good and acceptable, but they've deviated from the way it should be operated. And then things that never should happen. And so whenever we have videos come out, and when we have these series of videos come out, we have to be cautious about how we react to them, because we cannot defend the indefensible. And there certainly were things in these videos that were indefensible. And so it's taking the right approach, acknowledging that an issue has occurred, and then working to respond and recover. And because of the uniqueness of the dairy industry in Lake Okeechobee, it's a very unique milk shed way down in South Florida. There was a lot of customer relations that had to be rebuilt and managed, and are still being managed by the dairy industry down there. This group did a very good job of disrupting not only the business of the 4 individual farms where they did the undercover videos, but all of the farms in that area were affected because of marketing relationships with customers. And that's still an ongoing effort.
And we're going to, after a few questions here to get started, then we'll come back, and please address any questions to the individual related to the specific subject for more information on that. Bryan, we, as a point of differentiation, is another avenue of an industry under attack. Why don't you bring the group up to speed as it relates to the challenges that Ohio has been facing as it relates from an environmental issue and water quality side of it?
Sure. So before I get started here, I think it's worth explaining that from my viewpoint, and this is not necessarily everybody's viewpoint, but from my viewpoint, I see there are 2 separate groups of activists in this country. There are the hardliners that we heard about during the last presentation, that negotiation is not an option. Discussion and education is not an option. And then on the other side, there are the pragmatists, the groups or the individuals who are activists who truly want to see some change, but they've read their Saul Alinsky, and they know that the incremental change and working with industry and working for the betterment of everybody to come to those solutions will get them further faster. In Ohio, I am, on water quality, I'm blessed to have both of those groups and hitting us from multiple fronts. And so we have the hardliners up around the lake who there is no option but the shutting down of animal agriculture, and that we are the problem in Lake Erie. And we are, if we shut down all livestock production, that the lake will magically become better and the algae bloom will go away. The reality is that that's not true. And we can explain to them that according to all the studies, livestock production is responsible for 8 to 12% of the total phosphorus going into Lake Erie. And that doesn't register with them. They're the hardliners. And they do some fascinating things around PR. And it's not dissimilar from things we saw with animal rights groups on the other avenue. And those folks are taking fish, dead fish, and dumping them in public fountains, or taking glasses of algae-filled water and dumping them out before the mayors of Toledo. And doing those types of things. And those are PR stunts in their effort to continue the drum roll against livestock agriculture, or in some cases against agriculture as a whole. On the other front, though, the pragmatists are the folks who are sitting down with us and having conversations about what we can do to improve in animal agriculture and learning about the things that we already do. It is fascinating to hear these folks come out and say, well, you should force everybody to soil sample. Okay, most of our guys already soil sample. Well, you should force them all to have a nutrient management plan. Yep, that's a great idea. Most of our guys have to have that to get a loan, so they're already doing those things. But those are the folks that we can work with. So what am I learning from these folks? That they're not necessarily connected, but in times they're coordinated. And that's been a challenge for us as the pragmatists say, hey, work with us. We want to have those conversations. Let's keep the dialogue open. While at the same side, the other avenue, who we know there's communications going back and forth with, are attacking us openly and bluntly. And that presents a challenge for us. But again, as Dallas has probably said multiple times over the last couple of days, it gives us the opportunity to tell them what we stand for and not what we're against. And so it opens that dialogue for a conversation with the pragmatists to be able to move forward. So a lot of learning opportunities, but the environmentalists, I will say, there tends to be, from my vantage point, having worked at NPPC and dealt with the animal rights folks also, on an environmental aspect, I could be, just my personal experience, there tends to be a lot more opportunity for discussion and dialogue about where we can improve in animal agriculture and helping them understand what we've already done than there does on the other side anyway. So I'm not saying they're better. I'm just saying they're different folks to deal with, and for better or for worse.
So we've had two examples here, one in animal welfare and one from an environmental situation. And we've all talked about the opportunity we have of learning, being more proactive. God, I hate that word, but anyway. And so as we move into that, Scott, in your area, coming from somewhat outside agriculture and dealing with it, and this more from a systematic approach in dealing with the public relations and crisis management and crisis communication for many years, what advice do you give the attendees as it relates to this process?
Sure. Well, you've got a slide up there to work with the Alliance to come up with some touch points for you. It can really end up being... try it again.
Are we working back there?
You want me to scream? I can scream.
Or move your deal up just a little bit, Scott, possibly.
Okay.
There we go.
Is that better?
There we go.
Well, I can talk about public relations, but I can't deal with technology, I guess. So, so we're working with the Alliance on this slide to create kind of a quick tips crisis list for you that you can keep by desk side and refer to. Full disclosure, we've also been working and are still working on that Lake Okeechobee issue. And that's kind of near and dear to me. I mean, my journalism roots are in Florida. I started at the Miami Herald. I went to the University of Miami, worked in Tampa for 5 years, and also Jacksonville. So we'd get in and around Ocala, Lake Okeechobee, you know, the farming district, citrus as well, of course. But very familiar with that challenge and that issue, and it's going to be getting worse, not better. I mean, these people are military, position themselves as military activists. It's kind of a gimmick, but as far as perception goes, it's very, very effective. And I have a media psychology degree, so I know something about qualitative and quantitative surveys, but nothing like what I've seen here. I mean, some of the surveys and the statistical information we've seen here has just been great. So how about doing an informal survey here? How many in the audience have had experience with an activist attack, an extremist attack? It's a pretty significant number. How many are concerned? We don't want to say afraid, right? But how many are concerned that you might be the victim of that kind of an attack? Yeah. Okay. So that's also unfortunate and significant. So some of the things that I'm just going to rattle through here hopefully will give you some tools because you don't want to be bringing a knife to a gunfight. And in a lot of cases, I mean, that's what's been going on. So these applications apply to small and large producers, retailers, a whole plethora of different kinds of folks who are out there. Don't feel like you're immune, and from the show of hands, doesn't look like most people feel like they're immune. Activists go to area of least resistance. They can be just like burglars. It doesn't matter, small producers, large producers, as we mentioned, operations. Small producers can be targets too, because the media will roll those into larger news stories. It'll be, you can be an example for a larger news story. So the activists are going to target you as well. Maybe not so consistently, but there's that possibility there, and I think we've seen that in the Florida situation. The most important thing to know when responding to activists, at least in general, is that preparation is the best defense. I think that we've heard that over and over again during the last 2 days and the presentation. If you wait to react to an attack, it may be too late. You look like you're coming to the party late. You look like you're unprepared. And you don't look as credible. You will be the target instead of the arrow. But you can flip that with preparation, and especially with engaging with the media in preparation, more one-on-one engagement, as we heard previously. It's very, very effective. You can get the benefit of the doubt if you convince them, maybe even off the record or on background, that you've got a story to tell, and a story that's verifiable with empirical evidence that your position is the correct one. Consistent messaging is crucial between you and your supporters. We've heard this before too. Coordinating a message is so very crucial because, and I hate to say this as a former journalist, but certainly it's the case, and it's certainly the case with extremist activists, is that they're looking for inconsistency. They're looking for weakness. They're looking for conflict. Conflict sells newspapers and social media and everything else that's out there today. So that coordination of efforts is really, really key. You need to develop relationships before attacks, to figure out how to present messages and so forth. Social media, news conferences. You heard the journalist the other day say how important Twitter is. I'll share something with you. I've been working with the FBI, kglobal has, on cyber attacks, specifically with law firms and against financial institutions and aviation as well. And we met with them out in Moses Lake for an aviation client in the middle of a more rural area, certainly. And I would be very, very concerned about cyber attacks coming towards ag to disrupt payment, logistics, anything else that you could think of that would be sensitive, because these terrorists are not stopping, and they're going to explore every angle. We talked about learning privacy and trespassing laws, the ag-gag issue, and being inventive and using RICO statutes is all very valid. But think of perception. It's very, very hard to try and look as if you're sticking to the rules and trying to enforce certain laws when you've got video that's so sensational. So that's very tough, but there are ways to combat it, and it goes to preparation and the right kind of kind of messaging. So I'm going to truncate this thing here. I've been taking a lot of notes going through all the good conversation. But you can think of going through a media training process. You don't want to say no comment. You don't want to react. You want to push back to lies, and you want to push back to untruths, but not look like you're being a villain. Look like you're being a reasonable, even-handed human being. But you've got to get that strong message across of how important your industry is to society and also to your family and to the roots of America. So practice, customize your crisis plans. Preparation is the best defense. And my colleague Deshandra and I are here to answer questions too. Thank you.
So the key takeaways, and I would challenge each of you that, in many things we have lots of SOPs. We have lots of practices today in which we share. The real question is, do you apply that same to the public relations and this issue? I mean, do you have a crisis plan? If you don't, you need to be working with your associations, whether it be the dairy or the pork or wherever, looking for professional help, contacting Animal Ag Alliance, for example. I mean, people, this is serious business. I mean, the fact that you need to be prepared. And we can, again, talk about all the bad people that are out there. But at the end of the day, in the heat of the moment, you need to be thinking about that. And so whether that's your whole list of processes in place for your people internally, or the contact that's made, or the steps that you take, we've pretty much been able, whether it be in the dairy sector, all of us in the barnyard have worked on this. So I would encourage you to do that. So with that, we're going to open it up. So we're talking about specifics here as it relates to both the case of animal welfare videos and what's happened to that, the broader sense of the crisis plan, or much as Bryan talked about, what you do to work with those as well that we need to share our story with and help serve as allies. So with that, we'll take questions from the group. We have one right there in the very far back.
Less of a question and more of just a suggestion. So you mentioned that we should go through practice scenarios or different drill responses. My suggestion would be, for those in the processing industry, we're so familiar with mock recalls. My suggestion would be to do a mock break-in or a mock situation where somebody comes on your farm. Send somebody from the main office that you trust to go to the farm and go through that scenario, and you'd be surprised at what's overlooked or thought is normal, and kind of pinpoint those things. And from the same standpoint, if you're more on of a production route standpoint, I'm sure most of us probably already do this, but that would be a great thing if you start to hear mumblings about somebody potentially being undercover within a barn or in an organization. I would suggest that should trigger an animal welfare audit or a biosecurity audit, and have your internal auditor go out and investigate. And it's less of a focus on exactly that person's there and more of just an overall thing, so you're able to get underneath it a little bit as a way to be proactive about the situation.
Yeah, if I can comment on that and build on that, I mean, that's all absolutely correct. And you need to, when you're training and when you're talking about how to react to that kind of an attack, you need to work with all of your people. I mean, your entire staff, truck drivers, staff, workers, whoever potentially could represent you come in contact, because they can be your best ambassadors or they can be your biggest liability. As a journalist, I certainly wanted to speak to management, but I wanted to catch somebody at a grocery store, right, who just walked out and may not have been prepped and would say something offhand. So everybody should be prepared.
I think the concept of communicating, if you think that you've had somebody on your farm, is important. One of the farms in Florida confronted an employee who turned out to be an undercover person and thought that they might have been videotaping. That person left the farm that day and never returned. That information wasn't shared through the market chain so that there could be assistance in determining what happened. And that delay I think, exacerbated. Perhaps if we had been able to intervene sooner, and this was at least 6 weeks before the first video was released, perhaps the narrative that came out would have looked differently. And I think that's a message to get out to producers. If you feel that something has gone wrong on your farms, whether it's an undercover activist, you've got an employee that's done something wrong, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your market chain so that they can help you look into the issue, and if there's a need be, recover from it. And I will say, I think that 6-week period was crucial, and I think the outcome would have been a lot different in Florida if we had had that additional 6 weeks of knowledge.
So, Bryan, for the group, give some examples of what you might think of as the collaboration or suggestions that you might do in, again, we not only like to put fences up around our farms, but we also like to put fences up around, we're not good at sharing. Can you give some examples of what might be some collaboration?
With the activists, I assume?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we try to do in Ohio is say open farms, I guess. But Terry is in the back here with Cooper Farms, one of our fine folks from Ohio that raise a lot of pigs. And Cooper's is fantastic at saying, you know what, you have questions, come on in. And we'll show you everything. We'll show you how our lagoon systems work. We'll show you how our application system works. We'll show you our soil samples. We'll show you our manure samples. There's no question off the table. And for the pragmatist activist, as they go through that and they get those questions answered, there tends to be a whole lot less animosity towards animal agriculture. And that has proven to be one of our biggest assets across the state. And Coopers aren't the only ones that do it. We have a lot of folks that do that. But it has been a tremendous resource for us in helping to stem some of that back. Now, in the event that a activist goes out and tries to find a farm on their own to go to her and they are shut down, that tends to cause some ripple effects through, where they say, well, you're hiding something, you won't let us out there. And that causes some real concern. So going back to how has that played out in the end, as we've taken some of these folks out to farms, or we've sat down, this is, and as Dallas brought up cooperation, one of my biggest assets in Ohio, in addition to being able to take folks to farms, is the ability to go have a cup of coffee or a beer with the activist. And to folks in this room, I see some of you literally shuddering in your seat at the idea of that, and I respect it. But by having that cup of coffee or a beer with these folks, I get an understanding of what they're after and what they're really looking for. And quite honestly, the Ohio Environmental Council, 3 years ago when I got there, was one of our biggest detractors. And they attacked us anytime they had the opportunity to. They put out reports about us that were false at best, misleading at worst. And in the 3 years since I've been there, we've developed an understanding, and they have not necessarily shifted their goals, but they've shifted their mindset on where their focus is and how they're going to move forward. That does not mean that they are fully supportive of the Ohio pork industry and everything that we do, but it allows us to have a dialogue there that we wouldn't have been able to have before. And so, again, open farms, show them what we're doing, and again, open that line of communication are going to be your best assets for the pragmatists. Hardliners, there's a different deal there, and I understand that. So,
Carlos.
Yeah. So the discussion has been more focused on attacks to farms and producers. And what about the tactics that are using with investors and large corporations, especially retailers, trying to move whole sectors towards, the way they want? Have you guys been studying those and how to respond to those tactics that are much more sophisticated, I guess?
Well, that goes toward that cybersecurity alert that I gave you. That kind of attack, that being hit in the pocketbook, is something that the activists certainly are aware with. Full disclosure, many years ago, I actually provided a couple of days consulting for one of the groups. It didn't last long when they found out that I've got family who raise pigs in Wisconsin and also a dairy farm and ranchers in Colorado and so forth. But these are the leaders of these organizations treat them like businesses. I mean, they're very sophisticated. This is their gig, right? And they're planning short-term, mid-term, long-term, and very much aware of business cycles that are going on in large corporations. They're looking to get into, and I know they're looking to get into your data and logistical information, and you have to treat them sophisticated that way. As a matter of fact, the midterm elections are coming up now. I'd be surprised if you don't start seeing more and more activism with them trying to influence elected officials and also influence the popular vote.
Jamie, you
in the undercover videos, they've become more sophisticated where they also work in tying brands to where the milk comes from, in the case of the dairy industry. And from a brand perspective, you can understand they're concerned about protecting their brand integrity. When they are tied to something on a video that looks and is awful, I think it's a reasonable reaction for them to want to distance themselves from that. The long-term goal there, though, is that the activists want to make it so that brand doesn't have the opportunity to sell animal protein. But in the short term, they're trying to get that reaction that puts perhaps that individual farm out of business. But I think it's reasonable to understand that brands have an identity. They need to ensure that they maintain the value of that brand, and they have to make decisions based upon that. That's why there's a lot of work behind the scenes within our animal welfare program, I know across the other species, in working with the brands to help them understand, here's what we do when a crisis occurs. Our goal is to understand what happened, respond and recover. And, for those folks that, I work for a trade association. I don't have a direct financial relationship with a brand. For those dairy farmers and those cooperatives and processors that do, they also have to protect all of the other financial aspects that they're dealing with. The other farmers that supply that co-op or processor. Their own relationships with their markets. So I think it's reasonable to understand that brands, as they are being targeted, need to make decisions. I think what we want to do from the ag side is help them make informed decisions. We're trying to move from the never product from that farm again. Here's the process that we take to get that farm back in good standing, and we hope that you would take product from them again. And I think we're moving that dynamic. On the corporate side, yes, activist groups are buying small numbers of shares so that they can put up stupid resolutions at annual meetings. Companies will reach out. We've worked with a major pizza company a number of years ago where an activist group wanted them to source cheese only from naturally polled dairy cattle. The problem with that is less than 1% of the dairy cattle population right now. This activist group didn't put up that proposition because they thought that dehorning and disbudding animals is cruel, and they really wanted to move the industry to somewhere else. They put that up because they knew that the company couldn't source it. And if it passed, it would have put that company in a very terrible position. What is the thing that you like on your pizza? Probably number one is you want to have cheese on it. That group reached out to, that company reached out to industry, has a great working relationship, not only with its suppliers, but with Checkoff and the association. We gave them the information, and they were able to push back, and that proposal failed miserably. And so working with customers and helping them understand the production process builds trust, and in times of crisis can lead to quicker recovery and better protection for both the brands, the producers, and the intermediaries.
I think it's really important where you get the idea here. I know we focus a lot of our efforts here on things such as undercover video, what's happening on the farm and that. But the evolution of these businesses, and they are businesses, is changing dramatically from the initial onset of focusing on animal abuse to then focusing on production practices that weren't maybe the best thing to show to consumers. And then from that, they migrated into, things such as pressure on the brands, Walmart, whoever that may be. And now the evolution, as you heard from Carlos' question, is pressure on the financial markets as it relates to right now. These companies are very concerned about shareholder price, return to investors. And so there are a number of tactics you just need to be aware of, that it's not solely about on-farm. On-farm is still very important, but they're learning much faster than we are. And so you have to stay abreast of that. Yes?
Doug Ackerman with the Dairy Alliance. One of the things that we're trying to focus on real heavily, and I appreciate you guys all bringing it up, and Scott and Jamie, thank you for all of your efforts on our behalf in the dairy industry, is the whole communication piece. And, as these things were happening and we were traveling around to our 9 states talking about it, we quickly discovered that there were instances of drones being in freestall barns and these different kinds of things that we needed to increase. So our area of focus is really increasing that communication, starting to track some of these things and really making sure that we amplify that communication. Jamie, could you specifically talk a little bit about the importance of the farm program and moving forward and how important that's going to be for us to really be proactive?
Sure, thank you. And I didn't plant that question, but it sounds like I did. So the National Dairy Farm Program, Farmers Assuring Responsible Management, was started by National Milk with support from our dairy checkoff back in 2009. We were starting to have customers that were they wanted to have more transparency about what animal care looked like on dairy farms, and some were getting to the point where they might want to have their own animal welfare assessment or audit programs. And because of the way that milk moves and is distributed across this country, that would mean that an individual farmer could have had 5 to 10 different animal welfare assessments. That's unsustainable at the farm level because most of that would have been borne by the farmer themselves. So we started our animal care program to be a single point of entry national program. We've put together standards. We're in our 3rd version. We now have about 98% of the industry enrolled in the program. We have some minimum standards that farmers must meet to be in the program. I will say this, we don't require any farm to be in the program, any dairy farm to be in the program, but I think the marketplace has made the determination that dairy farmers must be in a program. And the one they're most likely to be in is the farm program. We have about 130 dairy cooperatives and processors that are in the program. So those minimum elements, if they're not meeting the minimum elements, we have a continuous improvement process. We want people to get them in place. We give them a time frame to get them in place. But at the end of the day, if they choose not to, they're no longer in the program, and that probably means they don't have a place to market their milk. Since we implemented those January 1st of 2017, we've had about 25% of the farms that have gone through the assessment starting in January 1st last year have been missing one of those minimum elements. It's taken them about 4 months to get those in place. So I think they understand that this program is important. And it's important for them as dairy farmers. It's important for the industry to have a program that works. And when there are issues that come up, we work to identify them, see if we can help the farmers improve, and get them back in good standing. Having a successful program that can change over time, our standards now are different than when we started in 2009, is important. We had what I'll call for our industry a divisive practice called tail docking. Done for a variety of reasons. We started having customers that were making their own demands on tail docking. We had no science to back it up for the use of the practice, and we had our veterinary associations that were no longer supporting it as a routine practice. So we had to take within our program and bring the entire industry along at the same time and get to the same point. And so we made that decision that January 1st, 2017, tail docking is no longer appropriate in the dairy sector. And so, it's important that the program is successful, because if it's not successful, then people are going to be under a variety of other programs. And it's a very important part to our industry, and I think that our co-ops or farmers have really embraced it. I think our customers have embraced it, and it's really helped us.
I think we have time for one last question.
Hi, I'm Lea McGrath. I'm a dietitian with the retailer. I want to give a shout out to Sue Bora with FMI. As a retailer, we depend on FMI, the Food Marketing Institute, who helps communicate these issues about activist documentaries and episodes on television. And because a lot of times we're not hearing from the producers, as a retailer, we're not hearing from farmers, so we depend on an organization like FMI. Well, we depend on FMI to be communicating that information to us, because if not, we hear directly from the activists first, or our consumers first, who are seeing these videos on YouTube or watching ABC or CNN and seeing that. So for those of you who don't know Sue Bora, there she is. Raise your hand. There she is. The other thing I wanted to mention, I had a great conversation last night with Bryan up on the stage about an episode I had involving dairy. I am the Dairy Alliance area, and I put up a photograph of milk, a glass of milk. It was just a picture of a glass of milk and a container of milk, saying, these are tough times for dairy farmers. We need to try and support dairy. Buy our private label brand of milk. If you don't like milk, we have plenty of plant-based beverages available at our store. And got a lot of really nice comments. We had about 102,000 views within 5 days of that simple picture that I took on my dining room table. Within probably the first 48 hours, the activists got a hold of that picture, and they really started making a lot of really negative comments about milk and calves and pus and the usual stuff. And so I was telling Bryan this, and he said I had kind of missed a really unique opportunity to sort of flip-flop that situation. I don't know, Bryan, if you remember that conversation we had. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I drank a little bit, but I remember that. Yeah. Kidding. So the conversation last night, and one of the things I challenge our folks at the Ohio Pork Council to do is, anytime we get hit with something, to look for the opportunity in it. And if you've ever read the book or seen the movie Crisis is Our Brand, you understand where I'm coming from here. But the idea is, okay, we've got a bad situation. How do we make the most out of it? And how do we leverage this in a way? And if you'll give me a few seconds here, I know we're over. One of the best stories of this in my mind is, if you're familiar with the Iowa Hawkeyes rivalry in the state of Iowa, there's what's called the Cy-Hawk Trophy. And it's supported by and sponsored by the Iowa Corn Growers Association in Iowa. And a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I don't know, they rolled out a new trophy. And it was a big to-do about this new trophy. And it was beat up one side and down the other. The state of Iowa, as a general term, disliked the way the trophy looked, what it symbolized, everything else. Iowa corn, in my mind, and I still to this day don't know if they set it up this way or if it just happened to be this good, they flopped that entire story around and said, you know what? You're right. We're going to redesign this trophy. Everybody come give us your feedback. Come to our website. Check out our Twitter feed. Check out all these things. And the traffic just increased dramatically. And it looked like they had, and I'm not saying they did this in any means, but from an outsider's perspective, it almost looked like they did it on purpose to drive traffic to their website. And that's probably not what happened. We know that. Mistakes are made. But the reality is they switched that situation around in such a magnificent way that they drove the conversation about Iowa corn, the products they produce, about ethanol discussion, and all these other things that I'm not sure they would have had otherwise. And so my challenge there was, and anywhere else, in agriculture, our first reaction is always shut it down. Shut it down fast and shut it down hard so we can get back to business. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that's the most effective media strategy. Other times we miss the boat. Other times we miss the opportunity to talk about what it is that we're doing and what it is we're working on. It's scary. And it should be. It should be terrifying to do that. But at the same time, there's a great opportunity to have a discussion that you can't have without a crisis. people don't listen to what we talk about until there's an issue, right? And so we had an opportunity there, but it's a challenge. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Well, I think these gentlemen are going to be around so you can have some discussion and to learn more specifically about your area. But some key takeaways. One, do you have a crisis plan in place? If not, be talking to your association, talk to Animal Ag Alliance. The process is not unique to any one species or groups. The application is across all. You have a professional here that does this. Sit down and talk with them about that deal. The real question is, are you prepared for that call? Or when the TV van pulls up in the driveway, what are you going to say? Please don't say, well, I bet it was staged. That's not going to get you anywhere. Understand, that this is serious. Next to a foreign animal disease outbreak, this is about as serious as it gets because it shuts you off. You can't sell your product. That's not good for us. And then more importantly, what are you doing to engage? Not each other. We're really good at engaging each other. What are we doing to engage those influencers outside? Whether it be your key customers, key influencers in your town, in your area. And as Bryan said, those that are kind of maybe not always our friends, but they're not our enemies that we have to do. So that's a challenge. That what are you doing to open up and talking about that? Humanize, what you're doing. You're trying. We're not perfect. But the key question, especially with the customers, remember this if you don't remember anything else. What were you doing prior to the event occurring that demonstrated you had thought about it, cared about it, and had plans in place to address it? It's exactly what Jamie was talking about. We're trying to provide a pathway, an on-ramp to get back onto business. There may be disruption for a while, but discovery and arguing and pointing fingers during this, in this day and time, is not the solution. Because today, in this new brand management world, the easiest thing is just the phone call you get. Are you getting pigs from this place? Are you getting milk from this place? If so, we don't want it. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what happens. And we have a job to do to make sure and assure them that we deal with biologics, both humans and animals, and sometimes things happen. But we're trying our best to assure that it doesn't happen, and when it does, we're going to address it. So, with that, thanks everyone for your time. We'll take any questions afterwards.